and let her in. Hey, folks. We're going to wait just a couple minutes and see if David and Trinae join us. Here's Trinae. Hello. We're just gonna wait just another minute and see if we get everybody else. Oh no, it says it's not letting David in. Fudge, I would say. Restart your computer and try again. Sometimes it just likes to be goofy. Let me know if that doesn't. What a pain. I hate that. Okay, we'll see if David is able to get in. That's going to be annoying if not. He's trying to get it anyway, so I'm going to mark him present. Let me plug in. I'm going to share my screen today. There's me. Okay. We are starting Toni Morrison Tuesdays today, which means that we will start reading our book together in just a bit. But there are a couple other things to look at first and to talk about first. So the first thing is I'm just going to kind of give you like a brief summary of what this book is about, because it is very weird. It's a very weird book. Nice. So you said it's a very dark book. The first time I read it was in grad school, and it was one of those books where like I was trying to read it in all of my spare time because I was so invested, but then I would be like thinking about it for such a long time after, because it's just really thought-provoking and emotional and strange. So basically the plot is that we have our main character whose name is Setha. She was a former slave, and when, like, right after she got freed, something happened to her child. Her child died. And the child, it doesn't ever give the child's name, but like on its grave was written beloved. That was all they had, all that they could afford. So years and years later is our main timeline. This does jump back and forth in time a lot, which can be sometimes kind of confusing, but flash forward and their house is kind of haunted by the ghost of the baby that died. And then at one point, this woman, this mysterious woman, kind of comes out of the water near the house. And there are all these weird things about her that lead Setha, our main character, to ask, is there any chance this is like a reincarnated version of my baby that died? And, you know, you kind of go back and forth a lot about like, is that possible? Could that be a thing? This book is classified as magical realism, which is more or less realism, meaning like it's meant to portray life as it is, but with a little hint of supernatural stuff or things that aren't quite explainable. So it's really interesting. There are multiple timelines. I don't even know how to tell you how many. So we see her some when she was a slave on the plantation. We see some when her kids were very young, like right around when her baby died. And the main plot line is like after she's already been freed for a long time, and kind of dealing with the ghost baby and everything. And it doesn't just tell her perspective. Sometimes it tells this guy that she knew when she was a slave. And sometimes it tells the story of her mother-in-law and sometimes other slaves on the plantation. But there's a lot of jumping around. And so for that reason, I usually make students do this, but I'm just going to kind of like walk you through it and like what it would be like if we did do it. We have this thing like a pre-reading activity with 3 narratives. So like if I were making you guys do this, you would be writing 3 different narratives, each starting with the sentence, school has been canceled today due to snow, from 3 different perspectives: teacher, parent, and student. And so when we talk about a narrative, we're talking about a descriptive piece that tells the plot, the sequence of events, like a story. So you just write like a short reaction series of events from the perspective of each character after they hear the news that school is closed for the day. So it would kind of take on a little bit different sentiments for each one. So for instance, if I was writing from the teacher's point of view, I might say, school has been canceled today due to snow. While in the back of my mind, I lamented that my schedule of lesson plans would be disrupted, I couldn't help but rejoice internally. 2 more hours of sleep than a big cup of coffee and a cozy blanket beats giving a test, that's for sure. So like that would be a teacher perspective. You know, you've got some mixed feelings about it and concerns about lesson plans. If we did it from a parent perspective, even if it starts the same, school has been canceled today due to snow, you might have a very different perspective. Like a kid's most ardent dream, but my worst nightmare. Our normal sitter is out of town. I have a big meeting today that I can't afford to blow off. Who will watch my excited children? Different set of concerns, different perspective. But then if you have it from the student perspective, I mean, y'all could probably come up with one as easily as I could because you're actually students. But again, starting the same, school's been canceled today due to snow. Even though it meant I would lose the extra sleep I'd been granted, I knew I could just take a nap later. For now, I would go get my sweater, coat, scarf, and boots and pounce on my sister to wake her up. We can spend the whole day playing in the snow. So we have different concerns, different point of view from each perspective, and that's an important thing to keep in mind as we start reading this book. This is the only novel that we do in AP Lang. because as you know, most of our stuff is sort of based on nonfiction, reading essays, speeches, that kind of thing. But I feel like this is a really good one to do for several reasons. Structure is really important in this one, especially with the nonlinear timeline. Diction, word choice is really important. There is a good bit of dialect, and some of it's not even dialect. It's just like specific word choices that the narrators use to kind of make a different effect. And I'll point those out when we get to it. What else? I mean, perspective and point of view, obviously, since that's what we're talking about, that's a big one. And these are all skills that you can apply to whatever we're reading, whether it's essays or speeches or whatever else. And it's cool that they come together in this really interesting narrative. So if you look on Canvas, I've published a couple of things here. We're going to look at the Beloved pre-reading. And it just tells you a little bit about the history behind this book, and Toni Morrison, who is the writer, who just died in the last like year or so, I think. I was gonna look it up. I can't hear you. Okay. 2019. Oh, I knew it was pretty recent. All right. So this is just a bit of food for thought. The New York Times recently dubbed it the best fiction novel of the last 25 years, which, look at what year it was published, 87, so not 25 years anymore, but she was writing up until she died. She's got a lot of books. While there are a million sites on Beloved and Morrison, to which I could link you, you can do that work on your own. So I thought I'd share some of my own thoughts. She's the most profound, powerful writer of our day, both on social issues and personal issues. Her command of language is almost uncanny, and her diction and syntax are that of a true master. Simply put, she will rock you with just a few seemingly simple words. While all her novels have a haunting element, in Beloved, she is a master of magical realism, the blending of the fantastic with the mundane. She does this in an artful, elevated way to create a sublime work that's both relatable and powerful. Her use of language, rhythm, repetition, metaphor, flashback, song, alliteration, imagery, and 1,000 other literary devices we've discussed renders her novel beyond artful. She poses questions about the importance of self and the memory that extend well beyond the slavery narrative she relays. You'll find the reading difficult but rewarding. Engage with it, give it the time it is due. Her sentences are fragmented as memories are, and her progression is nonlinear as life often feels. She has dubbed her writing oral literature, meant to be heard and read actively, with readers constructing meaning. Allow the book to sing to you, and that meaning you will retain for a lifetime. So I like the fact that they point out that like her sentences are fragments, but that is reflective of how memories are. And this book is very focused on memories and what you recall from the past and whether it's accurate. And then, you know, her progression is nonlinear, and life often feels nonlinear. And I don't know if you guys at your age feel that, but I certainly do. The way that time just kind of blurs together. Okay, so a little background about her. Toni Morrison, the first Black woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature, very cool, was born Chloe Anthony Wofford on February 18th, 1931 in Lorain, Ohio. She was the second of 4 children of George Wofford, a shipyard welder, and Brahma Willis Wofford. That's a nice name. Her parents moved to Ohio from the South to escape racism and to find better opportunities in the North. Her father was a hardworking and dignified man. While the children were growing up, he worked 3 jobs at the same time for almost 17 years. He took a great deal of pride in the quality of his work, so that each time he welded a perfect seam, he'd also weld his name onto the side of the ship. He also made sure to be well dressed even during the Depression. Her mother was a church-going woman and she sang in the choir. At home, Chloe heard many songs and tales of Southern Black folklore. The Lawfords were proud of their heritage. Lorraine was a small industrial town populated with immigrant Europeans, Mexicans, and Southern Blacks who lived next to each other. Chloe attended an integrated school. In her first grade, she was the only Black student in her class and the only one who could read. She was friends with many of her white schoolmates and did not encounter discrimination until she started dating. She hoped one day to become a dancer like her favorite ballerina, Maria Tolchief, and she also loved to read. Her early favorites were the Russian writers Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, French author Gustave Flaubert, and English novelist Jane Austen. She was an excellent student and she graduated with honors from Lorraine High School in 1949. Chloe Wofford then attended the prestigious Howard University in Washington, D.C., where she majored in English with a minor in classics. Since many people couldn't pronounce her first name correctly, Chloe, I guess it wasn't a normal name back then. I feel like Chloe's very normal now. She changed it to Toni, a shortened version of her middle name. Since many people couldn't pronounce, she joined a repertory company, the Howard University Players, with whom she made several tours of the South. She saw firsthand the life of the Blacks there, the life that her parents had escaped by moving north. Toni Wofford graduated from Howard University in 1953 with a BA in English. She then attended Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and received a master's degree in 1955. After graduating, Toni was offered a job at Texas Southern University in Houston, where she taught introductory English. Unlike Howard University, where Black culture was neglected or minimized, at Texas Southern, they always had Negro History Week and introduced to her the idea of Black culture as a discipline rather than just personal family reminiscences. In 1957, she returned to Howard University as a member of faculty. This was a time of civil rights movement, and she met several people who were later active in the struggle. She met the poet Amiri Baraka, at that time called Leroy Jones, and Andrew Young, who later worked with Dr. Martin Luther King and became mayor of Atlanta. One of her students was Stokely Carmichael, who then became a leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Another of her, okay, blah, blah. At Howard, she met and fell in love with a young Jamaican architect, Harold Morrison. Who did I say? Where did that go? I definitely said that, but now I've missed it. Oh, Stokely Carmichael, who then became the leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. At Howard, she met and fell in love with a young Jamaican architect, Harold Morrison. They married in 1958, and their first son, Harold Ford, was born in 1961. Toni continued teaching while helping take care of her family. She also joined a small writers group as a temporary escape from an unhappy married life. She needed company of other people who appreciated literature as much as she did. Each member was required to bring a story or poem for discussion. One week, having nothing to bring, she quickly wrote a story loosely based on a girl she knew in childhood who had prayed to God for blue eyes. The story was well received by the group, and then Toni put it away, thinking she was done with it. Her marriage deteriorated, and while pregnant with their second child, she left her husband, left her job at the university, and took her son on a trip to Europe. Later, she divorced her husband and returned to her parents' house in Lorraine with her two sons. In the fall of 1964, she obtained a job with the textbook subsidiary of Random House in Syracuse, New York, as an associate editor. Her hope was to be transferred soon to New York City. While working all day, her sons were taken care of by the housekeeper, and in the evening, Morrison cooked dinner and played with the boys until their bedtime. When her sons were asleep, she started writing. She dusted off the story she had written for the writers group and decided to make it into a novel. She drew on her memories from childhood and expanded them with her imagination so that the characters developed a life of their own. She found writing exciting and challenging. Other than parenting, she found everything else boring by comparison. In 1967, she was transferred to New York and became a senior editor at Random House. While she was editing books, she was busy sending her own novel to various publishers. The Bluest Eye was eventually published in 1970 to much critical acclaim, although it was not commercially successful. From 1971 to 1972, she was the associate professor of English at the State University of New York at Purchase while she continued working at Random House. In addition, she soon started writing her second novel, where she focused on a friendship between two adult Black women. Sula was published in 1973. It became an alternate selection by the Book of the Month Club. Hey, I'm in the Book of the Month Club. Excerpts were published in the Red Book magazine, and it was nominated for the 75 National Book Award in Fiction. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit of this. It's just like her teaching and publishing. In 1983, she left her position at Random House, having worked there for almost 20 years. In 84, she was named the Albert Schweitzer Professor of the Humanities at her school. While living in Albany, she started writing her first play, Dreaming Emmett. It was based on the true story of Emmett Till, a Black teenager killed by racist whites in 1955 after being accused of whistling at a white woman. The play premiered January 4th, 1986 at the Marketplace Theater in Albany. Her next novel, Beloved, which is what we're reading, it was influenced. What? Was influenced. Oh, I see. Was influenced by, and we're not spoiling that. It was a bestseller in 1988. It won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. She became the first Black woman writer to hold a name chair at an Ivy League university. While accepting, she said, "I take teaching as seriously as I do my writing." She taught creative writing and also took part in the African American Studies, and Women's Studies programs. She also started her next novel, Jazz, about life in the 20s. It was published in 1992. In 1993, she received the Nobel Prize in Literature. She was the 8th woman and the first Black woman to do so. So she's kind of a big deal, is why I read all that stuff. She broke a lot of barriers. She has written a lot of really famous stuff. And her stuff is very moving and emotional. So we are going to start reading it. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second because I want to see if this is David. It's not David. I don't know what happened to him. But I have a little bit in the, I've only got one hard copy of it here. I did have at least like 6 last year, and for some reason they're gone now, which we did lose like a big box of books in the move, but also maybe my students didn't give them back. So 2 things that I want to show you guys. First of all, the dedication in this book. I don't know if you can read that, but it says 60 million and more. And the reason that it's dedicated to 60 million and more, I mean, God knows how many slaves were killed during the time of slavery, but she refers, sort of like alludes to a lot of slaves coming over on what we call the Middle Passage, which was when slaves were taken from West Africa and brought to America in a slave ship, which was like the worst conditions imaginable. And you'll see some of that in the book. But like literally people stacked on top of each other in the bottom of the ship. Sometimes they would die, and so you just have like a dead body on top of you or underneath you. People were just like going to the bathroom or doing whatever else they needed to do right then and there. People died just from the horrible conditions of it, and we know that at least 60 million people died on the slave ships coming through the Middle Passage. So that's why she's dedicated it to 60 million or more. And I'm going to go ahead and warn you, like a lot of this book is really upsetting and like kind of graphic when it talks about it's like the treatment of slaves, and it's really upsetting, but also like there's a reason that it's in the story, you know, it's never just like exploitative. So the second thing I was going to show you is the epigram, which is oftentimes just like a quote or something at the beginning of the book, and the PDF version does have this as well. But it's a verse from the Bible, Romans 9:25. It says, "I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved." And I think that might take on some more meaning, like as we start reading, particularly when we've gotten a lot of the book kind of under our belts and are understanding it. But I will call them my people, which were not my people, kind of indicating that like these people who are othered in some way are claimed by whoever's talking, probably God in this instance. So like claiming people who are maybe not looked on as being worthy by most people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. So again, like kind of claiming someone who seems less than worthy. So we'll keep that in mind as we're reading. And I'm going to start reading today, unless somebody else wants to read. But one of the sort of frustrating things about this book is that it's not divided into chapters. It's just divided into parts. So like part 1 is quite long. So I'm going to actually share my screen and show you guys what this looks like. And I'm going to come up with a reading schedule so that you'll go ahead and know, like, from week to week how much you need to be reading. But while the hard copy is how many pages? Like 325 pages. The PDF version is only 137. So it's just got more on the page, but it's fairly digestible. So before next week, at least, if not like later today, I'll sort of write out a schedule of like from week to week how much you need to be reading. But for this time, by next Tuesday, I want you guys to read through the bottom of page 24. So that's not that much. And I will try to get that figured out ASAP so that I can kind of, you guys can kind of know where we're headed. Okay, so we're going to start reading, and we'll read for the time that we have left together today. But just make sure that you read through the bottom of page 24 before next week. Anybody want to read before I start? All right. Part 1. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with the spite in his own way, but by 1873, Setha and her daughter Denver were its only victims. The grandmother, Baby Suggs, was dead, and the sons, Howard and Bugler, had run away by the time they were 13 years old. As soon as merely looking in a mirror shattered it, that was the signal for Bugler. As soon as 2 tiny handprints appeared in the cake, that was it for Howard. Neither boy waited to see more. Another kettle full of chickpeas smoking in a heap on the floor, soda crackers crumbled and strewn in a line next to the door sill. Nor did they wait for one of the relief periods, the weeks, months even, when nothing was disturbed. No, each one fled at once, the moment the house committed what was for him the one insult not to be borne or witnessed a second time. Within 2 months, in the dead of winter, leaving their grandmother, Baby Suggs, Setha, their mother, and their little sister Denver all by themselves in the gray and white house on Bluestone Road. It didn't have a number then because Cincinnati didn't stretch that far. In fact, Ohio had been calling itself a state only 70 years when first one brother and then the next stuffed quilt packing into his hat, snatched up his shoes, and crept away from the lively spite the house felt for them. So here in the first paragraph, we've got some setup of characters. Setha is our main character. She has had 3 kids, or she has had 4 kids, 3 that are alive. She's got her daughter, Denver, who is a steady character throughout the whole thing. And then she had 2 older sons, Howard and Bugler, but they both left home basically because they couldn't deal with the ghost baby. It was doing weird stuff, and they were like, we got to peace out. And then Baby Suggs, who is Setha's mother-in-law, and she's dead at this point, but we'll see her a lot in flashbacks. She is an important character too. And we've got the setting, which is in Cincinnati, in their house, 124 Bluestone Road. Baby Suggs didn't even raise her head when they left. From her sickbed, she heard them go, but that wasn't the reason she lay still. It was a wonder to her that her grandsons had taken so long to realize that every house wasn't like the one on Bluestone Road. Suspended between the nastiness of life and the meanness of the dead, she couldn't get interested in leaving life or living it, let alone the fright of 2 creeping off boys. Her past had been like her present, intolerable. And since she knew death was anything but forgetfulness, she used the little energy left her for pondering color. Bring a little lavender in if you got any, pink if you don't. And Setha would oblige her with anything from fabric to her own tongue. Winter in Ohio was especially rough if you had an appetite for color. Sky provided the only drama, and counting on a Cincinnati horizon for life's principal joy was reckless indeed. So Setha and the girl Denver did what they could and what the house permitted for her. Together, they waged a perfunctory battle against the outrageous behavior of that place, against turned over slop jars, smacks on the behind, and gusts of sour air, for they understood the source of the outrage as well as they knew the source of light. Baby Suggs died shortly after the brothers left, with no interest whatsoever in their leave-taking or hers, and right afterwards, Seth and Denver decided to end the persecution by calling forth the ghost that had tried them so. Perhaps a conversation, they thought, an exchange of views or something would help. So they held hands and said, come on, you may as well just come on. The sideboard took a step forward, but nothing else did. Grandma Baby must be stopping it, said Denver. She was 10 and still mad at Baby Suggs for dying. Setha opened her eyes. I doubt that, she said. Then why don't it come? You're forgetting how little it is, said her mother. She wasn't even 2 years old when she died. Too little to understand. Too little to talk much even. Maybe she don't want to understand, said Denver. Maybe. But if she'd only come, I could make it clear to her. Setha released her daughter's hand, and together they pushed the sideboard back against the wall. Outside, a driver whipped his horse into the gallop local people felt necessary when they passed 124. For a baby, she throws a powerful spell, said Denver. No more powerful than the way I loved her, Setha answered, and there it was again. The welcoming cool of unchiseled headstones, the one she selected to lean against on tiptoe, her knees wide open as any grave. Pink as a fingernail it was, and sprinkled with glittering chips. 10 minutes, he said. You got 10 minutes, I'll do it for free. 10 minutes for 7 letters. With another 10, could she have gotten dearly too? She had not thought to ask him, and it still bothered her. And it bothered her still that it might have been possible that for 20 minutes, a half hour, say, she could have had the whole thing, every word she heard the preacher say at the funeral, and all there was to say, surely, engraved on her baby's headstone. Dearly beloved. But what she got settled for was the one word that mattered. She thought it would be enough, rutting among the headstones with the engraver, his young son looking on, the anger in his face so old, the appetite in it quite new. That should certainly be enough. Enough to answer one more preacher, one more abolitionist, and a town full of disgust. So you kind of have to read between the lines there, but that's sort of the first hint of like something terrible and graphic that we see when she buried her baby daughter. She didn't have the money to pay for a gravestone, but the gravedigger said, if you give me 10 minutes, I'll do it for free. Basically meaning, if you have sex with me for 10 minutes, I'll write one word on it. And that's what she did in exchange for being able to bury her kid in a dignified way, which is very sad and obviously like something that she kind of feels bad about, but also wonders like, could I have gotten more if I had spent more time with him? Counting on the stillness of her own soul, she had forgotten the other one, the soul of her baby girl. Who would have thought that a little old baby could harbor so much rage? Rutting on the stones under the eyes of the engraver's son was not enough. Not only did she have to live out her years in a house palsied by the baby's fury at having its throat cut, but those 10 minutes she spent pressed up against dawn-colored stones studded with star chips, her knees wide open as the grave, were longer than life, more alive, more pulsating than the baby blood that soaked her fingers like oil. We could move, she suggested once to her mother-in-law. What'd be the point? Asked Baby Suggs. Not a house in the country ain't packed to its rafters with some dead Negro's grief. We lucky this ghost is a baby. My husband's spirit was to come back in here, or yours. Don't talk to me. You lucky, you got 3 left, 3 pulling at your skirts and just 1 raising hell from the other side. Be thankful, why don't you? I had 8, every one of them gone away from me. 4 taken, 4 chased, and all I expect, worrying somebody's house into evil. Baby Suggs rubbed her eyebrows. My firstborn, all I can remember of her is how she loved the burned bottom of bread. Can you beat that? 8 children, and that's all I remember. That's all you let yourself remember, Setha had told her, but she was down to 1 herself. 1 alive, that is, the boys chased off by the dead one, and her memory of Bugler was fading fast. Howard at least had a head shape nobody could forget. As for the rest, she worked hard to remember as close to nothing as was safe. Unfortunately, her brain was devious. She might be hurrying across a field, running practically, to get to the pump quickly and rinse the chamomile sap from her legs. Nothing else would be in her mind. The picture of the men coming to nurse her was as lifeless as the nerves in her back where the skin buckled like a washboard. Nor was there the faintest scent of ink or the cherry gum and oak bark from which it was made. Nothing, just the breeze cooling her face as she rushed toward water. And then sopping the chamomile away with pump water and rags, her mind fixed on getting every last bit of sap off, on her carelessness in taking a shortcut across the field just to save a mile, and not noticing how high the weeds had grown until the itching was all the way to her knees. Then something, the splash of water, the sight of her shoes and stockings awry on the path where she'd flung them, or here boy, lapping in the puddle near her feet. And suddenly there was Sweet Home, rolling, rolling, rolling out before her eyes. And although there was not a leaf on that farm that did not make her want to scream, it rolled itself out before her in shameless beauty. It never looked as terrible as it was, and it made her wonder if hell was a pretty place too. Fire and brimstone, all right, but hidden in lacy groves, boys hanging from the most beautiful sycamores in the world. It shamed her, remembering the wonderful soughing trees rather than the boys. Try as she might to make it otherwise, the sycamores beat out the children every time, and she could not forgive her memory for that. I will say also, like, pay close attention to this book because she definitely throws in some foreshadowing and stuff that is so small that you'd never pick up on it. But like the details that she includes are there for a reason. So I love that last paragraph. I mean, it's horrible to think about, obviously, but I love the way she talks about how like Sweet Home, which is the name of the plantation where she was a slave, it never looked as terrible as it was. And there was all this pretty stuff that kind of concealed the real evil going on inside of it. When the last of the chamomile was gone, she went around to the front of the house, collecting her shoes and stockings on the way. As if to punish her further for her terrible memory, sitting on the porch not 40 feet away was Paul D., the last of the Sweet Home men. And although she could never mistake his face for another's, she said, "Is that you?" "What's left?" He stood up and smiled. "How you been, girl, besides barefoot?" When she laughed, it came out loose and young. "Messed up my legs back yonder. Chamomile." He made a face as though tasting a teaspoon of something bitter. "I don't even want to hear about it. I always did hate that stuff." Setha balled up her stockings and jammed them into her pocket. "Come on in." "Porch is fine, Setha. Cool out here." He sat back down and looked at the meadow on the other side of the road, knowing the eagerness he felt would be in his eyes. 18 years, she said softly. 18, he repeated, "and I swear I've been walking every one of them. Mind if I join you?" He nodded toward her feet and began unlacing his shoes. "You want to soak them? Let me get you a basin of water." She moved closer to him to enter the house. "No, can't baby feet. A whole lot more tramping they got to do yet." "You can't leave right away, Paul D. You got to stay a while." "Well, long enough to see baby Suggs anyway. Where is she?" "Dead?" "Oh, no. When?" 8 years now. Almost 9. "Was it hard? I hope she didn't die hard." Setha shook her head. "Soft as cream. Being alive was the hard part. Sorry you missed her, though. Is that what you came by for?" "That's some of what I came for. The rest is you. But if all the truth be known, I go anywheres these days, anywhere they let me sit down." "You looking good." "Devil's confusion. He lets me look good as long as I feel bad." He looked at her, and the word bad took on another meaning. Setha smiled. This was the way they had been, all the Sweet Home men, before and after Hallie treated her to a mild brotherly flirtation, so subtle you had to scratch for it. Except for a heap more hair and some waiting in his eyes, he looked the way he had in Kentucky. Peach stone skin, straight backed. For a man with an immobile face,
It's 2:00.
Thank you. It was amazing how ready it was to smile or blaze or be sorry with you. As though all you had to do was get his attention, and right away he produced the feeling you were feeling. With less than a blink, his face seemed to change. Underneath it lay the activity. "I wouldn't have to ask about him, would I? You'd tell me if there was anything to tell, wouldn't you?" Setha looked down at her feet and saw again the sycamores. "I'd tell you. Sure, I'd tell you. I don't know any more now than I did then. Except for the churn," he thought, "and you don't need to know that." "You must think he's still alive." "No, I think he's dead. It's not being sure that keeps him alive." "What did baby Suggs think?" "Same, but to listen to her, all her children's dead. claimed she felt each one go the very day and hour. When'd she say Hallie went? 1855, the day my baby was born. You had that baby, did you? Never thought you'd make it, he chuckled, running off pregnant. Had to, couldn't be no waiting. She lowered her head and thought, as he did, how unlikely it was that she'd made it. And if it hadn't been for that girl looking for velvet, she never would have. All by yourself, too. He was proud of her and annoyed by her. Proud she had done it, annoyed that she had not needed Hallie or himself in the doing. Almost all by myself, not all by myself. A white girl helped me. Then she helped herself too, God bless her. You could stay the night, Paul D. You don't sound too steady in the offer. Seth glanced beyond his shoulder toward the closed door. Oh, it's truly meant. I just hope you'll pardon my house. Come on in, talk to Denver while I cook you something. Paul D tied his shoes together, hung them over his shoulder, and followed her through the door, straight into a pool of red and undulating light that locked him where he stood. You got company? He whispered, frowning. Off and on, said Setha. Good God. He backed out the door onto the porch. What kind of evil you got in here? It's not evil, just sad. Come on, step through. Hang on, I'm just checking to see. No, we won't really get to a good stopping place, but I'll stop in a couple minutes. He looked at her then, closely, closer than he had when she first rounded the house on wet and shining legs, holding her shoes and stockings up in one hand, her skirts in the other. Hallie's girl, the one with iron eyes and backbone to match. He had never seen her hair in Kentucky, and though her face was 18 years older than when he last saw her, it was softer now, though her face was 18 years older, sorry, because of the hair, a face too still for comfort. Irises the same color as her skin, which in that still face used to make him think of a mask with mercifully punched out eyes. Hallie's woman, pregnant every year, including the year she sat by the fire telling him she was going to run. Her 3 children had already packed into a wagon load of others in a caravan of Negroes crossing the river. They were to be left with Hallie's mother near Cincinnati. Even that tiny shack, leaning so close to the fire you could smell the heat in her dress. Her eyes did not pick up a flicker of light. They were like 2 wells into which he had trouble gazing. Even punched out, they needed to be covered, lidded, marked with some sign to warn folks of what that emptiness held. So he looked instead at the fire while she told him, because her husband was not there for the telling. Mr. Garner was dead, and his wife had a lump in her neck the size of a sweet potato and unable to talk to anyone. She leaned as close to the fire as her pregnant belly allowed and told him, Paul D., the last of the Sweet Home Men. And in that part, we have a little bit of a flashback too, really just in the last few sentences there, where they flash back to 18 years previously. When she left, she ran away from the plantation while she was pregnant. And she also mentions the last of the Sweet Home Men, and she says something earlier about all the Sweet Home Men were like that. And Hallie is or was her husband, who seems to have disappeared. We don't know what happened to him, and she says that she assumes he's dead. Paul D clearly saw him at least one other time. We don't really know what he's talking about here with the churn, but whatever it was sounds pretty bad, because he's like, she doesn't need to know about that. So that was the Sweet Home was the plantation owned by Mr. Garner and his wife. We'll hear about some more characters from there as well that were worse. And Paul D and Hallie, who were 2 of the Sweet Home Men, and we'll hear about the other Sweet Home Men as well. There have been 6 of them who belonged to the farm, Setha the only female. Mrs. Garner, crying like a baby, had sold his brother to pay off the debts that surfaced the minute she was widowed. Then school teacher arrived to put things in order, but what he did broke three more Sweet Home Men and punched the glittering iron out of Setha's eyes, leaving 2 open wells that did not reflect firelight. So whoever school teacher is, it sounds like he's a bad guy. If it broke 3 of the men and like took the life out of Setha's eyes, he is not a good dude. Now the iron was back, but the face softened by hair made him trust her enough to step inside her door, smack into a pool of pulsing red light. She was right, it was sad. Walking through it, a wave of grief soaked him so thoroughly he wanted to cry. It seemed a long way to the normal light surrounding the table, but he made it, dry-eyed and lucky. You said she died soft as cream, he reminded her. That's not baby Suggs, she said. Who then? My daughter, the one I sent ahead with the boys. She didn't live. No, the one I was carrying when I run away is all I got left. Boy's gone too. Both of them walked off just before baby Suggs died. Paul D looked at the spot where the grief had soaked him. The red was gone, but a kind of weeping clung to the air where it had been. Probably best, he thought. If a Negro got legs, he ought to use them. Sit down too long, somebody will figure out a way to tie them up. Still, if her boys were gone. No man? You here by yourself? Me in Denver, she said. That all right by you? That's all right by me. She saw his skepticism and went on. I cook at a restaurant in town and I sew a little on the sly. Okay, we're gonna stop there. We only have like 3 minutes left. So I want y'all to finish reading through the bottom of page 24. And like I said, I'll post that. I'll probably put it in the announcements section of like how much you should be reading from week to week. But tomorrow, don't forget, we'll be doing our first prep essay. It'll be rhetorical analysis. I haven't picked which one we're going to do yet, but even if I had, I wouldn't want to spoil it. But there are a lot of good ones to choose from, so we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. This is probably a good place to stop. So I will see y'all tomorrow.